Most people don't know the actual strategies the cartels use in order to smuggle thousands of people and drugs across the US-Mexico border. Between 2019 and 2024, the US Border Patrol has reported almost 11 million border encounters. Most people think it's as easy as just walking across the border or sneaking around a fence, but in reality, these Mexican cartels are some of the biggest organized crime groups in the world who are using strategies that every day outsmart the US government.
The number of migrants arriving at the southern border is unprecedented.
The invasion at our southern border.
We're not going to be a safe haven.
An open border.
Borders are.
Deportations are supported incredible
the drug cartels.
And their ever-changing methods of sneaking men, women, and children across the southern border.
One of the cartel's most common strategies is their diversion tactic. Cartels will lead large group of migrants, typically in the hundreds or even thousands, to cross the border at a specific point.
On Monday, there was around 2,000 migrants here waiting to be processed. Take a look at the scene right now. It's actually quite remarkable. There's around 3,000 migrants now, and that number is going to climb.
These migrants crossing the border illegally end up surrendering willingly to law enforcement there waiting for them. This act of surrendering then takes significant time and attention, processing all these people at once and often giving them medical care and transportation to migrant facilities. While US border agents are tied up managing the migrant influx, cartels then exploit less guarded routes nearby to move drugs, weapons, and more high-paying migrants across the border. The cartels use drones and foot soldiers to identify where the agents are concentrated when they're dealing with the initial surge of low-paying migrants concentrated at one area of the border crossing. The cartel synchronizes these crossings at multiple points along the border simultaneously, making it harder for the Border Patrol to effectively respond everywhere all at once.
We are leaving large stretches of the border completely unpatrolled.
The cartels will even use children as a decoy in the initial large group of people crossing the border, as these children require more urgent attention from US Border Patrol.
Now we have 85,000 missing unaccompanied minors.
In some cases, cartels will even stage emergencies, leaving migrants in hazardous areas to trigger large search and rescue operations that require many border agents. This act of overwhelming the Border Patrol at certain points along the border is just one method on how the Mexican cartels are constantly outplaying the US Border Patrol. Another one of the cartel's most useful tools has been their drones. The Rio Grande Valley sector of the Border Patrol alone has seen 10,000 drone incursions across the border into the US and 25,000 drone sightings in just 1 year. The cartel is using these drones to find gaps in the Border Patrol's movement and plan where they need to send people, drugs, and weapons to. Part of the reason these drones are so effective is because the cartel knows that the Border Patrol can't do anything about it.
Yeah, the U.S. military has been using them. The cartel is loving them.
There's many legal restrictions in place that prevent the U.S. Border Patrol from shooting down the cartel's drones. For example, shooting down drones can violate federal laws such as the Aircraft Sabotage Act or the Federal Aviation Act, which prohibits damaging or destroying any aircrafts, including drones. Additionally, if the drone originates from another country, shooting it down could be seen as a violation of international law or escalate tensions between both countries. Lastly, border agents may not always know who the drone belongs to, whether it belongs to the cartel, a private citizen, or is even one of the Border Patrol's own drones. With this all in mind, the cartel continues to increase their drone usage across the US-Mexico border, knowing the Border Patrol agents can't do much to stop it.
The capability of the cartels about getting things across the border through drones already is extraordinary.
Another strategy the cartel deploys to sneak migrants across the border is sending them in through different vehicles. Standard sedans, SUVs, and trucks are often modified with hidden compartments to hide people sneaking across. Back in 2020, border agents found 53 undocumented migrants inside a refrigerated trailer at a Border Patrol checkpoint in Laredo, Texas. When Border Patrol opened the refrigerated trailer, they found 53 individuals from Mexico, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, all present in the US illegally.
The truck passed through a border point checkpoint. It was not inspected. It was not inspected because the Border Patrol does not have the resources to be able to inspect all of the trucks.
Cartels will also replicate official-looking vehicles like ambulances or government vehicles to reduce suspicion. These smugglers will often use a fleet of vehicles all moving together, with some vehicles carrying migrants, some acting as lookouts, and others acting as decoy vehicles meant to overwhelm the Border Patrol all at once. Often in these vehicles, migrants will carry forged permits and other fake legal entry documents that the cartel provides to them. In the case that sneaking into the United States above ground becomes too difficult, cartels will even build sophisticated tunnels underground to bypass border security. These tunnels can range from basically gopher holes used for quick smuggling to long, more sophisticated tunnels stretching hundreds of feet and often very deep underground. Just in 2022, a massive tunnel system was found connecting Tijuana in Mexico to a San Diego warehouse in the United States. This underground tunnel was 1,744 feet or 531 meters long and had a rail track, electricity, and even a ventilation system. Local officers in San Diego were noticing many people being shuttled in and out of this San Diego warehouse and decided to investigate. When the officers entered the warehouse, they found the tunnel's exit point carved out in the floor. The officers also found 1,762 pounds of cocaine, 164 pounds of methamphetamine, and 3.5 pounds of heroin. Since 1993, 90 different tunnels connecting Mexico to the United States have been found. On the Mexican side, these tunnels often start in suspicious locations like safe houses or industrial buildings. On the American side, these tunnels often have an exit point in places like warehouses or abandoned buildings. The cartels are using ground-penetrating radar systems to find where the most optimal soil is for constructing these massive tunnel systems. Considering how high-tech these tunnels can be, the tunnels are expensive to build and require skilled workers and advanced engineering knowledge. Given the cartel's success with these tunnels, this shows the highly advanced level that the cartel is able to operate at.
They fear no one anymore, especially the U.S. law enforcement.
Many of the migrants illegally coming across the southern border today don't even need to go to these extreme lengths to make it into the United States. For the migrants coming across the southern border in a more orderly fashion, but surrendering themselves to Border Patrol once they make it across, this is typically done knowing that these migrants can claim they're seeking asylum. To seek asylum means one person leaving their country and requesting protection in a new country with the purpose of fleeing human rights violations in their previous residence. In the United States, people who fear persecution can apply for asylum if they are already physically present in the country or if they are seeking asylum at a port of entry, one being the southern border. These Mexican cartels coach the migrants on what to say to U.S. authorities in order to properly claim asylum. This is a common strategy used by people trying to move to the United States, but it's not always successful. According to the Human Rights First organization, in the years of 2022 and 2023, 55% of people seeking asylum ended up being granted access. Other reports have the success rate just under 50%, but the success of these asylum cases heavily depends on the person's nationality, legal representation, and the specifics of their exact case. More people today are applying for asylum at the U.S. southern border than ever before. The last time the U.S. immigration system was significantly reformed was back in the late 1980s. Back in the 1980s, the vast majority of migrants coming across the southern border were single Mexican men looking for work. This is no longer the case. These asylum seekers aren't coming claiming to be looking for work, they're coming to seek refuge because they have what the US government determines a credible fear in their home countries. The US government would prefer single men looking for work coming across the border rather than these asylum seekers, as the asylum seekers typically come in families that result in increasing the strain on housing, healthcare, and social services. On the other hand, single men more often fill gaps in industries like agriculture and construction, and are seen as part of the workforce with fewer dependents requiring government support. This preference is less about discrimination and more about balancing resources and immigration goals. Since 2020, there's been a large increase of families encountered at the US-Mexico border and a shrinking population of single adults. Even very pro-immigration cities in the United States, like New York City for example, have run out of places for these migrant families to stay.
We've run out of space, where to put people. And then whenever we try to find creative ways, people are pushing back and saying, well, we don't want it on our block, we don't want it in our community. Hey, listen, but the bottom line is we have to go somewhere.
For the people who are truthfully seeking asylum into the United States, just making it to the southern border can be an extremely dangerous trek on its own. It used to be that essentially everyone coming across the southern border of the United States was from Mexico, but this is now not the case. The majority of people sneaking into the US are from Central America, South America, and the Caribbean, but US Border Patrol even encounters migrants coming from other continents across the Atlantic Ocean. To start with Central America, many of these migrants begin their journeys on foot, by bus, or even using freight trains like La Bestia to head north into Mexico. La Bestia is a network of high-speed freight trains that spans the entire country of Mexico. Climbing aboard La Bestia is an extremely dangerous journey that's taken by many migrants from Central and South America looking to get to its ending points of Ciudad Juarez, Nogales, and Reynosa, Mexico. Over the years, many migrants have fallen from the trains or have even been caught beneath their wheels, losing limbs and even their lives.
With no advance warning, this train leaves the station. Latecomers make the dangerous run to get on board what's been called the train of death.
The migrants ride on the rooftops of the train cars, exposed to the extreme heat during the day and freezing temperatures at night going through the desert. Criminals have preyed on these helpless passengers, who often get robbed or even worse from these criminals. The Mexican government, under increasing pressure by the United States to control its own borders, has cracked down on these migrants hopping onto the trains. While La Bestia is the option that migrants are forced to choose with little to no money, if migrants are willing to pay more for transportation, there's also buses that transport migrants from Mexico's southern border up to the US-Mexico border. Despite being safer than La Bestia, these buses are still very overcrowded with poor ventilation and often have very few safety measures. These buses are operated by the different Mexican cartels in order to make a profit, but the Mexican government themselves actually also have buses that ship migrants to the US-Mexico border. The difference with these buses the Mexican government offers is that it's only for migrants who have already had an asylum appointment scheduled with US Border Patrol. Nonetheless, even making it to Mexico's southern border to hop on a bus or a freight train is an extremely dangerous journey in itself, especially for those coming from South America. One of the most dangerous parts of the journey for migrants coming from Venezuela, for example, is passing through what is known as the Darien Gap. The Darien Gap is a 60-mile-long stretch of dense jungle connecting Colombia to Panama. There are no clear paths or roads in this region, so navigating through, you'll encounter thick vegetation, steep mountains, and treacherous river crossings. Not to mention, this jungle is home to venomous snakes, jaguars, and aggressive insects like mosquitoes carrying diseases such as malaria. To make things even worse, organized criminal groups operate in the Darien Gap, targeting migrants with robbery and even physical violence. In 2024, the Darien Gap saw a record 500,000 people crossing through this region, with the year not even over at the time of me writing this script. And then if we expand the distance even further, there's migrants coming from overseas in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia primarily. Typically, their journeys begin with flying to countries in Latin America with relatively lenient visa requirements, such as Brazil, Ecuador, or Nicaragua. From there, these migrants will take the same routes that anyone from Venezuela or Colombia would take, using smuggling groups, informal transportation, or even organized caravans to reach the US-Mexico border. Migrants from countries experiencing well-documented wars or major conflicts such as Afghanistan, Syria, Sudan, or Ethiopia may have a slightly higher chance than others at being granted asylum by US Border Patrol. There's an asylum backlog in the US immigration courts that's currently over 2 million cases and counting. This massive backlog means that applicants may have to wait years for a decision, regardless of their nationality. With many migrants having to wait years before being allowed to enter the US by seeking asylum, this creates a massive buildup of migrants in Mexico, close to the US border. Safe houses have been created near the border that serve as temporary shelters for these migrants, awaiting the next phase of their journey. These safe houses are typically run by the cartel and are typically sites for extortion, violence, and mistreatment. Some safe houses are in cramped apartments or often in rundown buildings with little privacy or ventilation. Dozens of migrants may be confined into a single room with no bedding or sanitation. There's also safe houses out in remote ranches or warehouses. These rural properties may keep the migrants out of sight of the Mexican government, but the properties typically lack running water or electricity. These safe houses are typically anything but safe, with the widespread criminal activity that takes place here. The criminal activity is orchestrated by the many different Mexican cartels, which span the entire country of Mexico. Mexico currently has 9 major cartels and dozens of smaller groups operating across the country. The largest and most dominant cartel in recent history has been the Sinaloa Cartel, controlling much of Mexico's western regions, including Sinaloa, Baja California, Durango, Sonora, and Chihuahua. Researchers estimate that the Sinaloa Cartel has over 175,000 members, and even has people working from them in roughly 100 different countries. This is said to be the largest organized crime group in the world, boasting some of the most famous cartel leaders too, one being El Chapo. While the Sinaloa Cartel remains a major player in Mexico's cartel world, its dominance is increasingly challenged by the CJNG, or otherwise known as Jalisco New Generation Cartel. This group is known for their extreme violence and rapid expansion, taking up much of the central part of the country. Not all cartels are at constant war with each other, but as of 2024, the Sinaloa Cartel and Jalisco New Generation Cartel are in a major war against each other over territories and drug routes. The territories these two cartels are fighting over include Michoacan, Zacatecas, and Baja California. These two groups also have completely different hierarchical structures, where the Sinaloa Cartel has a very business-like approach, and the CJNG employs very violent militaristic methods. The Mexican government has deployed military forces to combat the cartel violence, but these often escalate conflicts even more without addressing the root causes of the cartels forming. Entire communities end up getting caught in the crossfire of the cartel's violence. Businesses, lawyers, and even farmers are often forced to choose sides and face threats depending on who they choose to side with. Both cartels even recruit children and teenagers to act as lookouts, or known as halcones in Mexico, ingraining this violent lifestyle into Mexicans at a very young age. Cartels will also offer large sums of money to Mexican officials in exchange for protection, intelligence, and permission to operate in specific areas. Given the widespread poverty throughout Mexico, even modest amounts of money can be enough for more low-ranking Mexican officials. The cartels have a famous phrase, plata o plomo, where plata translates to silver and plomo lead. This is essentially saying, either give us silver or face our lead bullets. Many officials end up complying with these requests for fear over their own lives and even their families' lives. Mexican cartels will even go as far as funding political campaigns in Mexico. They often provide funding to multiple different candidates in order to secure influence over whoever wins the election. Cars, homes, vacations, and other luxury items have been offered to politicians running in elections in the case that they end up being elected. Very few Mexican politicians run on putting a serious end to the cartels for fear that their life or even their families' lives will be in danger with an anti-cartel platform. With the cartels appearing to only be getting stronger, it's hard to imagine what a solution would be to end their growing influence over the whole country. One of the reasons these cartels continue to get stronger is because of their complex hierarchy they employ. At the very top are the cartel boss, or more formally known as the capos. These are the ultimate leaders, responsible for the cartel's strategic decisions and dealing with other criminal organizations and corrupt leaders. It's hard to know the exact number of capos in each cartel, but it's likely there's only a handful of them. Each of these capos oversee a specific territory or operation. El Chapo was once the top capo in the Sinaloa Cartel, but the capos are constantly changing, considering many of them get captured by the United States or even the Mexican government. Below the capos are the lieutenants and financial officers. These lieutenants are responsible for maintaining order in their own territory and handling turf wars with other rival groups. The lieutenants report directly to the capos. The financial officers are involved in the money laundering operations of the cartel and are also in charge of distributing the profits amongst the cartel. Moving down another rank are the operational units, who are the more hands-on members of the cartel. Within the operational units, there's the enforcers who carry out the violent tasks such as the assassinations or kidnappings. These members are heavily armed and trained with military tactics. Then there's also the logistics coordinators who manage the transportation of drugs, weapons, and money. The logistics coordinators set up drug smuggling routes that could extend all the way down into South America and then figure out the best path to transport these drugs back into the United States. The third operational unit are the drug producers, who are responsible for manufacturing these deadly drugs in very high quantities. Then lastly, we have the smugglers and couriers who handle the physical transport of drugs, weapons, and cash between Mexico and the United States. These smugglers specialize in moving drugs over the border through underground tunnels, hidden compartments in vehicles, drones, and even humans just walking across the border with them, or otherwise known as mules. The bottom of the totem pole in the Mexican cartels are the foot soldiers and street-level operatives. These foot soldiers are typically stationed on the border and monitor law enforcement movement and even other rival cartels. These members act as the eyes and ears of the cartel. These low-level members also act as the recruiters for the cartel, enlisting new members where they often target the youth and more vulnerable populations. Between all these different levels of command, as of 2023, researchers estimate there to be around 250,000 people working for the Mexican drug cartels. This hierarchical structure helps the cartels to remain disciplined, operate efficiently, and even quickly replace members that often get lost due to arrests and even deaths. Although these cartels do make billions of dollars each year smuggling people into the United States, they make even more money from their drug trade. These Mexican cartels are mostly focused on transporting drugs from one country and then into the United States, but these cartels actually create some drugs themselves. For the drugs that are grown, these cartels will often take advantage of less fortunate farmers and pay them to cultivate crops under the cartel's control. Two of these crops that are grown by the farmers are poppies and cannabis. Cannabis is grown in large, hidden plantations, although this drug has become less important to the cartels, with many American states legalizing cannabis in recent years. The cartels are shifting more of their focus to poppy fields in the mountainous regions of Mexico, which are converted to make opium. These poppy fields are in some of Mexico's most remote areas that are difficult to access, making them hard for law enforcement to detect and destroy. Most of these poppy fields are located in Mexico's Guerrero state, Mexico's most violent region. These poppy farmers here are so poor that they lived in wood-planked, tin-roofed shacks, often without any electricity or plumbing. This is an extremely mountainous region of Mexico, so shipping crops that are packaged in large quantities are very difficult to transport throughout the mountainous roads. Instead, it's much easier to transport opium paste, which generates more cash for small quantities. The farmers here say that there are no local users of the opium coming from the poppy fields. The opium is all exported, mostly run by the Sinaloa cartel. When these drug producers working with the farmers in Guerrero produce enough of this opium paste, they call the cartel's logistic coordinators to have it picked up and taken to a lab for processing. From the mountains where these poppy fields are located, most of the opium is then shipped to wholesale collection points like Iguala, Mexico, a more populated and easily accessible area. Here at these processing plants, the opium paste is converted into heroin typically and is then transported up to the US border in cars, trailers, buses, and even human mules. In order to protect these poppy fields, the farmers grow these crops behind large trees and on hillsides that aren't easily visible to the nearby mountain villages. These farmers also use the rainfall runoff to irrigate these poppy fields, so many of them are located next to creeks and other streams. When the Mexican government is able to find these poppy fields from satellite images, for example, the government then sends in helicopters that spray powerful herbicides on any fields that they find. The herbicide kills all the poppy plants, but also kills all the plants around them, which includes normal vegetation like trees and even legal crops. Many farmers in this area have said that they want to end the cultivation of these poppy fields, mainly because they know the destruction that these poppy seeds end up bringing to thousands of people. The plant-based opium needed to produce a kilogram of heroin can cost the producers roughly $6,000, which is actually somewhat expensive compared to other drugs. Heroin is also derived originally from a plant, in this case being the poppy seeds, while other drugs like fentanyl can be entirely produced in a lab. Combine this with the fact that the Mexican government has been getting better at destroying these poppy fields, and now the cartel is focusing less of their time on opium-based drugs and are shifting their focus more towards synthetic drugs like fentanyl. To produce a kilogram of fentanyl, it takes just $200 or even less, drastically lower than the $6,000 it takes to produce a kilogram of heroin. China is the leading producer of the chemicals it takes to synthesize fentanyl. Fentanyl requires certain chemicals to be synthesized together, which ends up creating the drug. Until stricter regulations were imposed in 2019, China was also a major supplier of fully manufactured finished fentanyl. Chinese labs would ship this finished fentanyl directly to cartel members located in the United States. Once the Chinese government cracked down on fentanyl shipments in 2019, China shifted their focus more towards sending the precursor chemicals of fentanyl and ships them directly to Mexico. In China, these chemicals found in fentanyl are produced in clandestine labs, often in industrial areas or rural areas where government oversight is less harsh. Specific provinces like Guangdong, Fujian, and Zhejiang have factories that have been linked to synthetic drug manufacturing. With China continuing to crack down on synthetic drug manufacturing, India has become an emerging country in fentanyl production. India's large pharmaceutical industry, combined with very limited government regulatory oversight, provides India with an opportunity to profit off synthetic drugs. In December of 2018, the Indian government seized approximately 100 kilograms of a precursor chemical to fentanyl, NPP, and arrested 4 Indian nationals in Mumbai. After an investigation, Indian authorities found that this NPP chemical was destined for Mexico and was deliberately mislabeled so that authorities wouldn't know what was truly inside the 100-kilogram package. Back inside Mexico, cartels purchase these precursor chemicals from Indian and Chinese suppliers. Mexican cartels then synthesize this fentanyl in hidden labs, constantly refining the process so that they can make large quantities at a very low cost. This finished fentanyl is mixed with heroin, cocaine, or pressed into counterfeit pills, often unknown to users. Fentanyl is extremely potent and thus extremely dangerous to any users. The lethal dose of fentanyl for most adult users is roughly 2 milligrams, which to visualize is equal to just a couple grains of salt. Even touching fentanyl accidentally or inhaling airborne fentanyl particles can be extremely dangerous. Not only does the cartel have powerful tools when it comes to drug manufacturing and distribution, but they are also loaded with deadly weapons. The Mexican cartels are heavily armed thanks to their vast network of smuggling guns into the country from the United States. The United States is actually the largest source of cartel firearms due to its relatively lax gun laws. Weapons are typically bought by straw buyers who are legal individuals in the United States buying firearms on behalf of others. These firearms then get transported down to the Mexico-US border and then smuggled into Mexico, similar to how people are smuggled into the United States. Because of this, Mexico's cartels are now heavily armed, despite only having one gun shop in the entire country. This shop is located on a Mexican military base outside of Mexico City, but purchasing a firearm at this place requires a rigorous vetting process that's only available to the Mexican military. Despite the country not allowing any guns to be sold to civilians, from 2015 to 2022, more than 160,000 people were killed with a gun in Mexico. The overwhelming majority of guns being used in these killings were guns coming from the United States. 68% of the guns recovered at the crime scenes in Mexico from 2016 to 2021 were traced back to American gun manufacturers. With that being said, it's estimated that 200,000 firearms are trafficked from the United States and smuggled into Mexico each year, only making these cartels even more powerful. With the everyday Mexican law-abiding civilians not having access to firearms, and the cartels having a stockpile of some of America's most powerful weapons, this creates a stark power dynamic between these two groups of people. Although this power dynamic isn't quite as stark as the difference between the North Korean elite and the everyday North Korean citizens. In fact, Kim Jong-un and other North Korean officials have recently been sending many of their military men to go fight against Ukraine and team up with Russia. Kim Jong-un has already sent over 10,000 troops to go fight in this major war, and you can now even see evidence of North Koreans fighting alongside Russia in this video right here.